on a very sad note, I have occasion this morning to bring condolences to the family of our chaplain, the Reverend Dr. Janius Wells, who concluded his sojourn on this earth a few days ago. He had an impact on my life. He was not only a person who I knew from my affiliation with the late Reverend Dr. Miles Monroe at DFM. I attended his church on many occasions on Chapel on the Hill, where he was the senior pastor. And he also was a constituent in the Nassau Village constituency, and the first chaplain appointed in this session of our Parliament. He was a peaceful, quiet businessman and pastor. I can still remember his words every time I would call him to speak to him. And I'd say, Pastor Wells, how are you? And he'd respond, I won't complain, I'll just explain. And his explanations were always profound. He had a gift of somehow knowing what the day was going to be like. And I remember on many occasions he would say to me, this is going to be a peaceful day today. Brother Speaker, I don't have to pray so hard for you today. And some days he would come and he'd say, Mr. Speaker, you need prayers today. And that was the kind of person that he was. And in his tribute, I'd just like to play a few stanzas before our chaplain takes us to the throne of grace.
Blessing and honor, glory and power be unto the ancient of days. From every nation, all of creation, bow before the ancient of days. Every tongue in heaven shall declare your glory. Every knee will bow at your throne. In worship you will be exalted, O God, and your kingdom shall not pass away, O ancient of days. Blessing and honor, glory and power be unto the ancient of days. From every nation, all of creation, bow before the ancient of days. Every tongue in heaven shall declare your glory. Every knee shall bow at your throne. In worship you will be exalted, O God, and your kingdom shall not pass away, O ancient of days. Oh yeah. Your kingdom shall reign over all the earth. Sing unto the ancient of days. No can compare. Sing unto every tongue in heaven shall declare your glory.
Thank you, honorable members, to Mistress Wells and family, we bring condolences on behalf of all the members of this honorable house and the staff of this parliament on the passing of the Reverend Dr. Genius Wells. May his soul rest in peace and rise in glory. Thank you, Pastor. You can take us to the throne of grace.
Your guidance, your provisions for them as they face this very difficult time, especially during this Christmas season. And God, we remember him with fondness, and we thank you for his contributions. And we just continue to bless you for what he has done, not only for his family, but church and country. And we bring these things to you in Jesus' name. Amen. I want to begin by reading a scripture today. This is Proverbs chapter 22. It says, "A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, loving favor rather than silver and gold. The rich and the poor have this in common: the Lord is the maker of them all. A prudent man foresees evil and hides himself, but the simple pass on and are punished. By humility and the fear of the Lord are riches and honor and life." We have a question about what is the most valuable asset of an individual or a country. And we may refer to natural resources, we may refer to whatever we've been blessed with. But really, the greatest resource and the greatest asset that any individual or nation can have is a good name. A good name is something that has value, and if you lose it, then you begin to understand what the value of a name is. You know, I think about instances where people have lost their name and they've lost family, they've lost money, and some people have lost their lives. And so a name is so important to protect, particularly in the age that we live in, because in the age that we live in the past, it was a very difficult process to really disparage somebody and cause their name to be clouded. But with the advent of social media, one fake news story can make a person's name become less valuable. And it's difficult sometimes to recover because the internet hounds sometimes don't do any research and they just look at the first story and go with it. But I think that all of us, I want to remind you today to protect your name. Not only the name of yourself, but the name of this country. You know, when you think about the Bahamas, when you call the name Bahamas, historically, we were known as a hospitable people, a friendly people, a welcoming people. In some areas, our name has changed. And people think crime, people think corruption, people think all kinds of things about the Bahamas. And I believe our goal should be to restore our good name. And one of the best ways to have a good name is to be associated with good name. And when Jesus told his disciples, he told them, he said, don't go in your name, go in my name. Name has value. And I can personally attest that when I attach myself to that name, my value went up. The property value went up in my life. So I want to encourage everyone to make sure you protect your name and that you are attached to the right name. Amen? Let's bow our heads. Father God, we just thank you for another day. Thank you, Lord, that we've gone through a period where we have seen the COVID-19 infections continue to go down. And Lord, we pray, Father, that this would continue and that we would be able to, as a country, to recover and be restored. And Lord, we also pray, Father, that all of us collectively would work with us to make sure the name of the Bahamas is a name that is globally. For the proceedings today, we pray that always everything would be done decently and in order. And at the end of the day, you will be glorified. In Jesus' name, amen. Our Father, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses,
As we forgive those who
trespasses,
lead us not
into temptation, and deliver us from evil. Amen.
power and the glory.
Amen.
Peter Turnquist, Red Simonet, Desmond Bannister, Renwood Wells, Jeffrey Lloyd, Dr. Dwayne Sand, Marvin Dame, Frankie Campbell, Nicio D'Aguila, Michael Pintard, Darren Henfield, Ramal Pereira, Lanisha Rowe, Renzo Rowe, Ellsworth Johnson, Philip Davis, Vaughn Miller, Patricia Parker Edgecombe, R.M. Lewis, Carlton Bolag, James Albrecht, Travis Robinson, Adrian Gibson, Donald Saunders, Frederick McAlpine, Hank Johnson, Mark Hume, Michael Folk, Miriam Beckley Emmanuel, Reese Chipman, Ruben Ramming, Ricky Massey, Shannon Dawn Cartwright, Chanel Ferguson, Lennis Hannah Martin, Faisal Forbes, Chester Cooper.
Morning, honorable members. Introduction and swearing in of new members. Laying of documents by ministers.
Here.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Kalani.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Speaker, I beg leave there on the table of the House a copy of the following. Emergency Powers COVID-19 Pandemic Risk Management Number 3 Order 2020.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. Emergency Powers COVID-19 Pandemic Risk Management Number 2, Amendment Order 2020.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave lay on the table to also copy it for the emergent. The Financial and Corporate Service Providers Act 2020, appointed date, notice 2020.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave lay on the table of the House, copy of the following. Digital Assets and Registered Exchanges Act 2020, appointed date, notice 2020.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave lay on the table of the House, copy of the following. The Bahamas Register Stock Directions 2020, Bahamas Register Stocks number 14, 2023, 2025, 2027, 2030, 2040, and 2050.
Order that the documents be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave on the table of the House, copy of the following. The Deposit Insurance Corporation Bahamas 2019 Annual Report.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Mount Moriah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay on the table of the House a copy of the following. The Bailed Amendment Act 2020, appointment day notice 2020.
Order that the document be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further laying of documents by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, there are no further laying of documents by ministers.
Statements and communications by ministers.
Yeah.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Killarney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as members would recall, one of the key tenets my government promised upon coming to office was a commitment to provide transparency and accountability when it comes to managing the people's finances. It was for this reason that early in our administration, we passed the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2018, which mandates that each year the government presents to this honorable House and to the Fiscal Responsibility Council its Fiscal Strategy Report, or FSR. The purpose of this document is to set out the government's medium-term fiscal framework, which will guide the preparation of future budgets based on economic forecasts and fiscal targets established in the fiscal responsibility legislation. Mr. Speaker, Senator the Honorable Kwesi Thompson, Minister of State for Finance, will deliver a statement in the Senate later today detailing the 2020 Fiscal Strategy Report. The strategies we have adopted in the 2020 FSR represent a roadmap to return to a fiscally sustainable path and to accelerate the economic recovery. Implemented together, they will ensure that the government has sufficient resources and flexibility to meet the opportunities and challenges of governance for today and into the future. And they will also foster a stable and dynamic macroeconomic environment that can stimulate growth. Mr. Speaker, the Fiscal Responsibility Act states that the government is to present its FSR to this House on the third Wednesday of November each year, in this case being November 18th. Members would recall the government announced a delay to December for the FSR. This allowed analysts time to examine the economic data, to gauge indications on the trajectory of economic activity going forward. The importance of this fiscal strategy to our economic development cannot be overstated, for strong, structured, and disciplined fiscal management underpins our economic viability. Given the unprecedented times, it was the right thing to do, take extra diligence in crafting the strategies for the next few years, making use of the most current fiscal information about the planned reopening of tourism in November to inform critical policy deliberations. Mr. Speaker, as a result of Cabinet's deliberations, supported by countless hours of research and analysis by the Ministry of Finance's professionals, it is my privilege to table the government's 2020 fiscal strategy report. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Order that the document be brought up.
Yeah, you can just take this and put it together yourself. I made no amendments.
Order that the document to lie on the table. Further statements and communications by ministers. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, there are no further statements and communications by ministers.
Thank you. Communications by the clerk. Messages from the Governor General. Messages from the Senate. Motions for leave of absence, leave to resign seat, and new writs. Presentation of petitions. Presentation of reports of committees. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Golden Gates.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise as a member for Golden Gates and as chairman of the House Select Committee on Natural Resources in order to give an interim report pursuant to the rules of procedure of the House of Assembly of the Bahamas as amended on 2005 under the rubric Rules Governing Select Committees, page 17 of the said rules. And pursuant to Rule 22.9 thereunder, it states inter alia that, I quote, the chairman of the committee may at any time report progress and ask for leave to sit again, including for an extended time. Also, page 19 of the said rules, and pursuant to Rule 22.21, thereunder it states that a committee, and I quote, a committee may report its proceedings from time to time with or without the evidence and may make a special report on any matter within the scope of the reference to it. Also pursuant to the same rules under the rubric Order of Business, Rule 39(1)L states, quote, presentation of report to committee. Under the historical matrix, Mr. Speaker, this House of Assembly, pursuant to Rule page 35 of the said Rules 39U, unanimously appointed the Select Committee on Natural Resources on the 8th of July 2020 to the period being the 1st of October 2020. The Honorable Member for Centerville, an independent member, was the mover of the said committee and at all times actively supported by the Honorable Member for Golden Isles, then an independent member, but now a Progressive Liberal Party member of this chamber. The honorable members for Centerville and Golden Isles, sir, are applauded and commended for their efforts, and we can applaud them. The government agreed that we ought to have a select committee on natural resources and fully and unanimously supported the mover, resulting in the said appointment by this honorable House. The Honorable Speaker, in July 2020, appointed the following honorable members to the said committee: Centerville, Golden Isles, South and Central Andros and Mangrove Key, Marathon, Fox Hill, St. Barnabas, and Golden Gate. Due to our COVID-19 experience since the appointment in July, the committee had not progressed as it envisioned at the first meeting, and we were fast approaching the expiry of its life on the 1st of October 2020. Therefore, on Wednesday, the 23rd of September 2020, just about a week before the expiry of its life, of the committee, pursuant to the Select Committee's unanimous decision to seek to extend the life of the committee to at least two, including the 1st of April 2021. The chairman sought leave by the House under the said rules, the rubric, Rules Governing Select Committee, page 17, pursuant to Rule 22.9, and thereon it states, as we said earlier, that the chairman of the committee may at any time report progress and ask for leave to sit again, including for an extended time. On that occasion, the sought leave was unanimously granted by this honorable chamber, extending the life of the committee to the 1st of April 2021. The terms of reference of the committee. Mr. Speaker, I've just put on the easel the terms. The Honorable Speaker, also on the 8th of July 2020, the appointment date, read the terms of reference for the Select Committee as proposed by the mover. As proposed by the mover, the Honorable Member for Centerville, which was seconded by the Honorable Member for Golden Isles and unanimously agreed by this House, without amendment, without any deletion or any change, which is as follows, as you will see here: to investigate all matters relative to the natural resources of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, above, on, or below the terrain and or sea, to identify the sources of the natural resources that contribute to the Sovereign Wealth Fund, as well as entities, historical and current, engage in extractions, identify areas of disbursement, recommend to Parliament mechanisms to enhance accountability and transparency in awarding contracts for exploration and extraction and receipt of disbursements, and to consider and suggest the best ways to ensure that the birthright of every Bahamian is legally protected, with powers to send for persons and papers, with leave to sit from place to place, and with leave to sit during the recess. Mr. Speaker, the above committee had held its first meeting on Wednesday, the 22nd of July, 2020. Mr. Speaker, we have a wonderful photo of that first meeting. We have a wonderful photo of that first meeting. These are the members of the committee at the first meeting of the committee in the majority room downstairs. And you will notice there's honorable member for Centerville, Golden Gate, St. Barnabas. There's Fox Hill. There's South Andros and Central Andros and Mangrove Key. There's an honorable member for Marathon, and the member for Golden Isles had given his apology, so he wasn't at this meeting. And so I want to be clear, he did give his apologies. He didn't make this meeting, but he's been a very active member of the committee. The above committee held its first meeting on the Wednesday, the 22nd of July, 2020. At that meeting, pursuant to the Rule 2022-1 of the Rules of Procedure, as amended 2005, providing for an election of a chairman from among its members, and pursuant to that rule, the honorable member for Golden Gates was elected chairman. The work of the committee, sir. We spoke to the issue of identified natural resources, which was the first item listed in the terms of reference. At that next meeting, the committee immediately moved to do the first thing indicated in the terms of reference. That is, to identify the sources of the natural resources. The committee developed an extensive list of at least 25 natural resources so far, with the understanding that the said list might not be exhaustive, and is prepared to amend the list as is necessary in the future. Following that exercise, the committee went through the identified natural resources, asking each member to volunteer to develop preliminary research on at least one of them. Each and every member did so. It should be noted here that each and every member took the lead on at least one natural resource in terms of the initial preliminary research, and others volunteered to assist the lead member under identified relevant legislation. The committee also identified approximately 15 pieces of legislation so far that it was aware of that related in some way or another to our natural resources. Again, the committee accepted that the said list might not have been exhaustive and is prepared to amend the list as necessary in the future. Of particular concern to the committee at the outset was the Sovereign Wealth Fund Act for many reasons. After all, at the end of the day, it was anticipated that whatever funds were derived from the sale of our natural resources, wherever they might be, and when whoever was extracting or harvesting them, the amounts paid or realized was to be deposited to such an account. The committee determined almost immediately that if this act was to achieve what was intended as best we could determine, then amendments needed to be made. It is noted that just last week in this honorable chamber, the honorable member for Kalani, the most honorable prime minister, noted that the Economic Recovery Committee, the ERC, made the very same observation and conclusion that amendments to the Sovereign Wealth Fund Act are needed. Mr. Speaker, since then, the committee has been actively moving on several fronts, all at the same time, to do its best to advance its work on behalf of the Bahamian people, to get the facts as to all of our natural resources. Each and every member of the committee is committed to determining all the information about our natural resources because they are our patrimony. They are our inheritance, and they belong to each of us. We all agree, and so does this government, as it is stated by the terms of reference of this honorable chamber and fashioned by the honorable member for Centerville. Mr. Speaker, make absolutely no mistake about it. The natural resources of this country is the birthright of every Bahamian. And this committee is fully determined to get to the bottom of it all the facts, sir. We will operate on a twin track, sir. Everything natural resources on one hand, and simultaneously on the twin track, the Sovereign Wealth Fund Act. We will review that. Mr. Speaker, we realized that we needed to move in a twin track, one having everything to do with identifying the natural resources, where they are, where they might be, what amounts exist, the sustainability of them, were they being extracted or harvested now or planned to be? If so, by whom, in what quantities, what financial benefit was being realized by those who are extracting or harvesting, and ultimately, Mr. Speaker, what financial benefit was derived by and for the Bahamian people? Mr. Speaker, the second track involved having identified the expected benefit to the Bahamian people. Where were the funds going? Were they going to the Sovereign Wealth Fund? Was an account ever set up to achieve the said funds? To receive, pardon me, the said funds? How and who operates such an account, if it exists? And is there a reporting requirement to the Bahamian people through the House of Assembly or otherwise as to the sources and uses of all the funds so deposited, if any? This committee, sir, intends to have all questions relevant to the Sovereign Wealth Fund answered. All. We all want to know and deserve to know because it is our patrimony, it is our inheritance, and it is our birthright. Subcommittee, sir. Within the twin tracks, sir, we are doing a number of things. As to the Sovereign Wealth Fund Act, we have appointed a subcommittee to review it in its entirety and report to the full committee. The subcommittee has made progress already, benchmarking our legislation to others around the world. The intent is that the full committee will agree recommendations to the government in regard to the facts and our review of them to ensure that all Bahamians get the benefit of the funds derived from all of our natural resources as regards the Sovereign Wealth Fund. The Sovereign Wealth Fund Act subcommittee members are as follows. The Honorable Member for Fox Hill, Chairman. The Honorable Member for Golden Isles, the Honorable Member for Centerville, the Honorable Member for St. Barnabas. As to the natural resources broadly and the mechanics and structure of the committee's work, we have established another subcommittee, Mr. Speaker. That is the Witness Subcommittee. The members of that committee are as follows. St. Barnabas Chairman, Golden Isles, Centerville, and Fox Hill. Mr. Speaker, this committee is critical, absolutely critical in terms of the process as it relates to witnesses appearing before the committee when we get to that point. This committee has done some research already on select committees in the United Kingdom, the House of Commons, and I can tell you thus far, it has proven very instructive, informative, and enlightening. Mr. Speaker, we have also established what we have called an Ocean Industries, quote, Aragonite Mining Encouragement Act subcommittee designed specifically to address all matters relevant to that act, having regard to our terms of reference and our determination and commitment to get all of the facts about our natural resources so as to report same to this chamber and to the Bahamian people, and especially so having regard to the recent developments at our last meeting. The subcommittee is co-chaired by Honorable Member for Fox Hill and St. Barnabas. They are co-chairing, and other members include Golden Isles and Centerville. Mr. Speaker, let me say here, so that this committee is very serious and very determined as to every natural resource of our country and every aspect of them, with the strong intent to get all the facts, report them to this Parliament, and most importantly, report them to the Bahamian people. We all ought to know the complete status as to all of our natural resources. As we have said, again, they are our patrimony, our inheritance, and our birthright. We invite information, Mr. Speaker, and this is very important. We want the Bahamian people to know this. We invite information. This committee is serious about inviting information. Mr. Speaker, the committee therefore invites persons, organizations, or entities who has any information to share with the committee that they feel we ought to be aware of, so as to investigate it and determine the facts about the matter. And we'll repeat that, Mr. Speaker. This committee therefore invites persons, organizations, or entities who has any information, to share with the committee that they feel we ought to be aware of, so as to investigate it and determine the facts about the matter. Please send information that you desire the committee to review, which will be treated in strict confidence, to the committee via the clerk of the House. Receipt of the said letter and or documents will be registered as part of the official committee file, and you will receive an acknowledgement of receipt by the clerk. It is our full intention to investigate all matters regarding our natural resources, whether we discover them through our direct efforts or whether they have been brought to our attention, as just mentioned a moment ago. We should point out here, most importantly, that both, whether we discover them or they come to our attention, both will be treated with the same degree of seriousness consideration, and review. We intend to leave no stone unturned on your behalf and to your benefit, the Bahamian people. Let me also say, Mr. Speaker, if a person has a considered view about existing legislation or legislation one might propose for the committee's consideration and possible recommendation that relates to any of our natural resources, as I mentioned earlier, we have identified 15, but there may be more. Please, we invite you to write to the committee, as stated earlier through the clerk of the House of Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I now move to site visits. Mr. Speaker, the committee, at its very first meeting, determined to make site visits to the relevant locations in our country where we have reason to believe that our natural resources are being extracted or harvested. At the very first meeting, we determined to make those site visits to wherever we have reason to believe that our natural resources are being extracted or harvested. We intend to see for ourselves and ultimately to see for you, the Bahamian people, so that when we report the facts to this Parliament and to you, the Bahamian people, the report will not just be based on some document. It will be based on what we have seen for ourselves and for you, and observed with our own eyes for you, the Bahamian people. The facts on the ground matter, and we are serious and determined as a committee. Mr. Speaker, in fact, the committee determined islands to visit, islands and keys to visit already. It's already been determined by the committee. And, Mr. Speaker, we have set a preliminary schedule for those visits. It is our intention, following the holidays, by the grace of God, Mr. Speaker, to commence our first trip, the full committee, not a subgroup, the entire committee, as with every planned trip. The first trip being Thursday, planned for Thursday, the 14th of January, 2021. Then the following week, the 21st of January. Then the following week, the 28th of January. Or as close to that schedule as possible. The above is a preliminary schedule and is by no means exhaustive. We have considered and determined which islands or keys we intend to visit in the first set of site visits, having regard to the information we have received and gleaned thus far. Documents, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as to documents, you will recall earlier it was mentioned that every member voluntarily took the lead on one or more natural resources. Every member. Each member will indicate whether governmental documents they determine would be helpful and they would have credible reason to believe or suspect exists, which pertains to the research they are leading on. In that case, the committee will make every effort to obtain such document. That's very important. In that case, the committee will make every effort to obtain such document, whether from a ministry, a department, an agency, office of the government, or corporation. The committee wants to make clear that it expects the government's assistance. As to this, government is fully committed to the terms of reference approved and agreed unanimously by this House, and indeed, the wonderful work by this committee today. In fact, the chairman, on behalf of the committee, has already made an official request for information from a government corporation, which request has been acknowledged and assurances given that request is being acted on. We will get the facts. We are serious. We are determined. Public hearings. Mr. Speaker, the said rules under 2217 provides for public hearings stating as follows, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, quote, a committee may sit in public if the House gives that authority to the committee. That's rule 2217, close quote. The committee, no question about it, Mr. Speaker, intends to have public hearings as and when it deems appropriate. Therefore, pursuant to the said rule, the committee intends to seek the authority of the House to have some of its hearings in public, sir, for the media and general public, while others will be held in camera. The committee begs and anticipates that the House will grant the said authority for public hearings, public meetings. Conclusion, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the Bahamian people can rest assured that this committee is working on their behalf and their behalf only, and in their best interest, as each of us treat our work on the committee as a solemn duty to them and to our country, as a solemn duty to them, the Bahamian people, and our country. We, the committee, are determined to get the facts, all of them. We intend to honestly and thoroughly consider them and review them, assess them, and report them to this Parliament and indeed to you, the Bahamian people, in support of the recommendations this committee intends to make to the government regarding every aspect of our natural resources. Finally, sir, I want to say that every member of this committee takes their appointment to the select committee as a solemn duty to act at all times in the best interest of the Bahamian people. We intend to let the investigation, the facts discovered and determined to guide us and our direction solely for the benefit of the Bahamian people by the grace of God. So on behalf of the committee, I thank you for the opportunity to present this interim report and the first interim report of the House Select Committee on Natural Resources and the Sovereign Wealth Fund Act. May God bless the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Speaker, I now just want to go to the signature page, sir, if I might. The honorable members of the House Select Committee on Natural Resources and Sovereign Wealth Fund hereby duly sign this interim report on the said committee on this, the 14th day of December 2020, and is signed by the chairman, the member for Golden Gates, Michael Folks, the honorable member for Fox Hill, Chanel Ferguson, the honorable member for Central Andrews and Mangrove Key, Pricefield Forbes, the honorable member for Golden Isles, Vaughn Miller, the honorable member for Golden Isles, Reese Chipman, the honorable member for Centerville, the honorable member for St. Barnabas, Mr. Shannon Cartwright, and there's one member's name is not signed, is our dear friend, as we all know, had a personal and family tragedy, and so it is not signed by him, but we understand that's the honor member for Marathon. I think we all understand and appreciate the personal and family tragedy he's facing, and that's the only reason we do not have a signature for him. But we have, otherwise, we have all the members have signed, and this is a report that's agreed by all members of the committee. With that, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honorable member. Order that the report be brought up. Order that the report do lie on the table. Honorable member, I believe that you all will be in possession of a publication that was distributed moments ago. It was a gift, a philanthropic gesture by an anonymous donator or donor that gave a copy of the book by Diane Dar Coates, From Island Lad to Honored Statesman of the Bahamas, a brief biography of the Honorable James Oswald Ingram. You all should have a copy in your possession. And on a second note, God is good. It's Christmas time, and an anonymous donor has donated a Christmas lunch today for all members as well as the staff of this Parliament. So when we break for lunch, turkey, stuffing, and you name it, will be available to you. Adoption of reports of committees. First reading of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. Second reading and committal of bills. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Marco City.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We are going to debate both the amendment to the Immigration Act, as well as the bill for an act to provide for the regulation of the fisheries resources as a compendium.
The lead bill would be the fisheries bill?
That's correct.
Thank you, honorable member.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is an honor to have this opportunity to once again speak in this honorable place and to extend best wishes to the country at large, but certainly to my Marco City family, and to express to you my gratitude for this opportunity to be here, to be an extension of your voice and a part of the important work that you do every day to rebound from the negative impact of Dorian and the ravages of this pandemic, and to express gratitude to the Prime Minister for the opportunity to work in a pivotal area in national governance, agriculture and marine resources, and to salute the staff that continues to make sacrifices. Though they face personal challenges, yet they work on behalf of our wonderful country. And to say thank you to all of you and to all of the stakeholders. This morning, we discussed very briefly and more extensively in the wrap-up a bill for an act to provide for the regulation of the fisheries resources of the Bahamas, to provide for the long-term conservation, management, and sustainable development of fishery resources by the application of the precautionary and ecosystem approaches to enhance the livelihood of communities dependent on fishing and to meet the needs of future generations, to provide for the licensing of commercial fishers and fishing vessels, to deter, prevent, and eliminate illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing in Bahamian waters, and to repeal the Fisheries Resources and Jurisdiction and Conservation Act of 1977, and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, today is a proud day for many stakeholders who have in fact been laboring for more than 10 years to bring these amendments to this honorable House. Mr. Speaker, this is a collaborative effort, and I wish to say from the onset the obvious. Governance is a relay race. And the truth is, as I serve in this capacity, I am building on the work of previous ministers and those that work with them to ensure that we move our country forward in the right direction at a pace that will accrue benefit to the people that we serve. This leg of the relay, Mr. Speaker, brings to a conclusion attempts to modernize the legislative and regulatory framework that govern our marine resources. Mr. Speaker, this is not a race that completely ends here, for no doubt, in a dynamic world, there will be a need for additional amendments and future modernization. But today, this is a culmination of extensive consultation. In fact, Mr. Speaker, over the last 10 years, there have been no less than 9 public consultations, a series of sub-sector conversations about different aspects of our marine resources. And there have been numerous individual consultations by the Department of Marine Resources with stakeholders, with persons who had important recommendations or concerns about how this bill would affect them. And contrary to any public utterances that the public has not had any opportunity to participate, or any subsector an opportunity to participate in that, I wish to say that it is patently untrue. We have gone to great lengths to engage the public, and we are grateful, even in this place, to all the parliamentary colleagues, inclusive of members of the opposition and independents. We thank you for making the time for us to engage you, to answer any questions you might have. Mr. Speaker, this is an important move forward, but we say to the general public that we are not the only source of wisdom in this country. 39 can never consistently capture the collective aspirations and views of 400,000 plus people. And so we are open as your servants to make the necessary adjustments as you see it, which in your first look you may have missed. We are open to this input. So, Mr. Speaker, it is indeed an honor to have the opportunity to anchor this phase of this relay race to modernize our fisheries industry. Let me say, Mr. Speaker, that the components of our fisheries sector include the following: commercial fishing, and of course it includes land-based seafood processing and exporting facilities, the local recreational sector, the aquaculture sector, and the foreign/tourism or fishing sector, inclusive of fishing tournaments, open water sports fishing by licensed foreign pleasure crafts, and of course, the all-important flats fishing sector. Mr. Speaker, our nation sits within 100,000 plus. It's listed in a number of reports as 260,000 square miles of ocean. And we also possess additional inland waterways rich with marine life and assets that hold incredible opportunities for this generation and our children and grandchildren yet unborn. This legislation, Mr. Speaker, is a part of the combination to unlock the enormous storehouse of riches, of natural resources that are laid up for future generations. Mr. Speaker, let me put it this way. In this place, we are the gatekeepers. And since water is involved, the passageway to this country, to our exclusive economic zone, that is pregnant with opportunities for this country. And the question is, how do you unlock all of those opportunities? Well, a part of it is what we're doing here today with this groundbreaking piece of legislation. It is also done through policy decisions, programs, and projects. In this bill, we have a chance as a country and for the world to have a glimpse at the range of things the minister-led administration has been contemplating putting in place in order for this country, its residents, to benefit. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas is a part of a regional network that is extremely important, but we are also a part of a series of international agencies. This, Mr. Speaker, as you would see in this presentation, is extremely important because where we sit geographically, the Bahamas marine environment is a habitat that services this entire region for many important and iconic species. And therefore, in addition to the steps we have taken nationally to protect the marine resources, we are mindful of the fact that these are interconnected oceans, and our policies, our legislation ought to be interconnected with those that exist in other countries, sub-regionally, regionally, and of course, internationally. And so, Mr. Speaker, against the backdrop of Hurricane Dorian, against the backdrop of a devastating pandemic that has wreaked havoc on global economies, inclusive of the Bahamas, Mr. Speaker, all is not lost. There's tremendous opportunity for us to rebound. And our rebound, Mr. Speaker, is in part predicated on the performance of tourism and financial services, but the reality is diversification of our national economy is an absolute must. And this administration, as you would have heard from the leadership, is committed to making fundamental structural adjustments so that we are able to operate on parallel but interconnected tracks in order to bring all of our peoples along simultaneously. It would be tragic to emerge from this pandemic still narrowly focused on the twin engines of tourism and financial services, when opportunities abound by paying attention to a sector such as fisheries, though providing in the vicinity of 1% of GDP, has the potential to grow dramatically our contribution to national development, to dramatically increase beyond the 15,000+ persons who are employed in this sector full-time, and to dramatically increase our export of those particular marine products that's earning us in excess of $80 million per annum. Mr. Speaker, our spiny lobster tails is one of the three iconic marine species we have, the other being conch, the Nassau grouper, and it's difficult to conceive of a Bahamas where you are not thinking or associating those three products with the national identity of Bahamians. But the spiny lobster, Mr. Speaker, is a clear demonstration of successful species management, which has been accomplished as a result of collective collaboration between various stakeholders. This bill, Mr. Speaker, in part seeks to ensure that in much the same way we are sustainably managing, harvesting, consuming, and exporting the spiny lobster, that we can do so for the other species that are presently not exported, or those like the conch we have determined to discontinue exporting in just over a year. Mr. Speaker, the Bahamas' #1 edible export commodity, the spiny lobster, annually generates in excess, as I've mentioned before, of $73 million. However, this bill will clearly show that we have other opportunities in this sector that are underutilized and underexploited. The development of the fisheries sector is seen by many who have conducted studies in the Bahamas as holding the greatest potential for the immediate development of family island communities. Long Island, Eleuthera, inclusive of the keys that surround it, Andros, North and South, the southeastern islands, Grand Bahama, with iconic fishermen and fisherwomen from the east and from the west, from New Providence. Throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, we have an opportunity to develop our respective communities utilizing the resources available in our marine environment. Mr. Speaker, our mission is to develop the blue economy inclusive of fisheries, and the value proposition we believe, based on IDB studies, based on studies by the Food and Agriculture Organization, based on studies by CARICOM, we believe the value proposition for the Bahamas is in the billions. We must not miss this opportunity. With the coming into force of the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea in 1982, the Bahamas is responsible for regulating access to fisheries resources with the aim of ensuring the sustainability of these resources. Within the exclusive economic zone of the country, this access relates to fishing vessels and to fishers. Mr. Speaker, in many parts of the Bahamas, the commercial fishing industry plays a very important part in the development of those family island communities that I mentioned. Mr. Speaker, we challenge our young men and women to look at this sector and the potential that it provides for the national development of the Bahamas. This is an open economy that we have in the Bahamas. There are very, very few areas reserved for Bahamians. We must continue to demonstrate that we have the capacity, we have the wherewithal to develop and take advantage of our natural resources for the benefit of this generation and future Bahamian generations. We have lived for a long time in a country where we see the dominant industries often being controlled or dominated by persons who have traveled from distant lands to the land of our birth to realize their dreams, and not just for them, but for their children unborn. And while we welcome and we are in need of that cross-fertilization, we believe that we have an obligation to take charge of our economy from top to bottom, and the fishing and marine sector, the blue economy, gives us that opportunity. Mr. Speaker, it is also important to note the significance of sports fishing sector and the value of the tourism economy and how it benefits from our marine environment. Mr. Speaker, each year, no less than 25 tournaments are held principally on the islands of Bimini and Abaco. This, coupled with the development of the flats fishing sector, which is now taking place throughout our archipelago, bodes well for the economies of those communities and islands where these dynamic and profitable enterprises are taking place. Mr. Speaker, I wish to salute the association that has taken charge of the flats fishing subsector and congratulate them for the work they're doing with BAMSI in ensuring that we set up a national training program to bring a whole new generation into this lucrative area. The current Fisheries Act, Mr. Speaker, the Fisheries Jurisdiction and Conservation Act, came into force in 1977. Since its enactment, it has been subjected to numerous amendments in order to keep pace and to comply with the various international conventions to which the Bahamas has become party. agreements such as the United Nations Law of the Sea Convention and its varied international plans of action. Also, the Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species of Wild Flora and Fauna, CITES, and the Cartagena Convention, and in particular, its specially protected areas and wildlife protocol. As you know, as you would recall, Mr. Speaker, that this particular protocol is dedicated to ensuring the protection of biodiversity in the Bahamas. Just to name a few of these protocols is to make the point that what we do in the Bahamas and what we're doing here today through these amendments is interconnected with what our neighbors are doing in the region and other countries are doing around the world. Mr. Speaker, the modalities associated with aquaculture management and development are also being addressed in this legislation. It's important to note, Mr. Speaker, that more than 50% of the marine resources or fish that we consume are in fact farmed nowadays rather than harvested out of the oceans. So aquaculture holds a huge potential for development in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and we have just recently approved 2 additional significant projects in this particular arena. We are also working very closely with the Grand Bahama Port Authority to make sure we create additional opportunities for companies locally and internationally that wish to reside in Grand Bahama in a particular geographical area to study the potential that exists in a variety of marine species. And so you're going to see an exponential increase in inward flow of investment in the Bahamas, companies, universities, foundations, non-governmental agencies that wish to become a part of a cluster of smart organizations working in a collaborative way to study and to assist this country in profiting from our marine environment. Mr. Speaker, furthermore, the country's most recent signing onto the UN Food and Agriculture Organization's agreement on port-state measures to deter, prevent, and eliminate illegal and unreported, unregulated fishing on the 7th of October 2016. Mr. Speaker, this particular decision that was made by the country is a major leap forward for us. You would hear later in this debate by my colleague that IUU fishing has contributed to more than $20 billion in loss globally. The Bahamas is still in the process of documenting the impact of poaching, Mr. Speaker, on our marine resources. And so, Mr. Speaker, this bill makes provision for us in a responsible way to study the impact of illegal decisions as well as sensible decisions on our prospects for the future. Mr. Speaker, from its early inception, the Department of Fisheries, now the Department of Marine Resources, has been widely viewed as a law enforcement agency. After all, the department is primarily responsible for the enforcement of the Fisheries Act and its subsidiary legislation. The fisheries, that is jurisdiction and conservation regulation, allows us, Mr. Speaker, to govern how not just Bahamians but others behave when in our territorial waters. Yet in law, Mr. Speaker, there is no such entity as the Department of Fisheries or Marine Resources, or a Director of Fisheries and his subordinate staffing. In order to give a proper recognition of the department and its offices as the principal agency and individuals responsible for the enforcement of the Fisheries Act and its regulations, it is imperative that the department and its officers be afforded statute designation. This draft act and bill seeks to do just that. The review of the Fishery Resources Act of 1977, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned before, began in 1986 by FAO. Mr. Speaker, we further extended the review, working in conjunction with CARICOM member states. The draft was further developed in 1992 through assistance from the Inter-American Development Bank. So since 1977, we have seen the draft bill undergo a number of important revisions. In 1998, a draft was submitted to Cabinet with a number of provisions designed to improve the government's ability to achieve its objectives with respect to commercial fishing. Mr. Speaker, we also had additional revisions that went beyond looking at commercial fishing and also examined how we might better protect the environment in general. The draft by IDB is considered the starting point for the review and was the basis for moving forward and the basis for bringing us here today. On the 8th of May 2013, the Department of Marine Resources began a renewed process in earnest to complete the drafting of this new act. The African, Caribbean, and Pacific Fish 2 Technical Cooperation Project played a pivotal role in empowering us to move forward. I've mentioned earlier some of the consultations that flowed out of each of these efforts. Mr. Speaker, the port state measure has been extremely important for countries within this region, and we have also sought to collaborate with the assistance of the Minister of Foreign Affairs with each of our neighbors in making sure that we harmonize policies, programs that we were putting in place, and also examine the ways in which we could benefit from best practices in the legislation of our neighbors. We are grateful to the contribution by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, in this regard. Mr. Speaker, we held an important workshop with a number of the law enforcement agencies in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, as well as with NOAA, with a view of ensuring that there was proper intergovernmental collaboration as we sought to implement the port state measures. Mr. Speaker, we believe have moved the needle in the right direction in terms of demonstrating how we must collaborate in the Bahamas if the marine resources is to be protected, managed properly, utilized for the economic empowerment of our people. And in this regard, I'd like to cite the important role played by fishers who have participated in any number of the consultations and workshops. And then, of course, the Bahamas National Trust, the Bahamas Reef Environment and Education Foundation, the Nature Conservancy, the Bahamas Commercial Fishermen's Alliance, all of them convened in the past to assist as we met with different stakeholders to plan the way forward. We're also grateful to the Office of the Attorney General and Dr. Judith Swan, an international expert in port state management measures, and who served as a legal consultant to guide the process of us implementing these measures. Mr. Speaker, this new act seeks to do several critical things that I wish to highlight. One, Mr. Speaker, it modernizes our governance structure. It promotes an integrated approach to the management, considering, Mr. Speaker, the rights of every stakeholder that benefits from our marine environment. The way in which we govern our marine environment, Mr. Speaker, cannot be tilted in one direction or the other. We must take into consideration those that are engaged in subsistence fishing, commercial fishing, recreational fishing, sports fishing. All of these partners are important. And we want to make sure in this legislation that there is ongoing accountability, transparency in all that we do, and that when we make decisions as policymakers, it is made on the basis of data, empirical data, rather than how we feel or conjecture or what the latest post may be in social media. We are committed to evidence-based decision. Mr. Speaker, this bill, further under the topic of governance, seeks to facilitate partnerships in co-management with fishers, non-governmental organizations, and other stakeholders. This bill, Mr. Speaker, is also committed to careful management of all of our marine resources, not merely those above the seafloor, but those that reside on and under the seafloor. It expands the fisheries management resources and ecosystems to also include inland waters, territorial waters, and our exclusive economic zone. So, Mr. Speaker, as you could see, this amendment goes well beyond what is resident in the present legislation. It is wider in scope. In addition, under the topic of management, we seek to collaborate with regional and international organizations on establishing international standards and best management practices. Mr. Speaker, a species that may be born in the Bahamas or in the Bahamas in abundance often migrates south. So we have a duty of care, not just to us, but to our neighbors to the south. And so we have an obligation to continue to form these partnerships. Mr. Speaker, we realize that we must continue to develop policies as we examine the adverse impact on our scarce resources so that we are able to mitigate against those negative impacts. And this is precisely why we have developed, Mr. Speaker, a list of measures to preserve the count. We recognize that the count is under threat, and therefore it is important that we insist upon having count landed in the shell, and we have met with stakeholders. We intend to move forward with that measure so that we are able to determine the maturity of the count, which can only be determined by the lip thickness, which you cannot determine when somebody goes and break out the count on the bottom of the ocean, leave a graveyard of shells, a foreign practice introduced in this country that we're going to bring to an end through this legislation. We also, Mr. Speaker, signaled to the public, met with exporters and indicated that we are going to end the export of count. And we have, over the last 2 years, going into the third year, gradually decreased the count quota. And so, Mr. Speaker, by 2022, there'll be zero export of count from the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And tourists can no longer harvest count in Bahamian water and consume. It will not be a part of the bag that they are able, or marine resources they are able to catch in Bahamian waters. And we've moved away, Mr. Speaker, from tourists, sports fishermen coming to the Bahamas, and every one of them having a separate bag limit. We are saying there's a limit for the vessel itself, So those loopholes that people use to fill their coolers and their deep freeze and sell, we are now closing those loopholes, Mr. Speaker. This bill, Mr. Speaker, also addresses the issue of climate change and looks at ocean health and the protection of biodiversity. It is important, Mr. Speaker, that those that are interested in this sector take a look at the IDB report, which clearly outlines a number of very important opportunities. Mr. Speaker, we're having a lot of discussion in the Bahamas now about natural resources. And just to mention, aragonite is but one of them. And Mr. Speaker, there are many. We are a big ocean state rather than a small island state. And Mr. Speaker, the reality is we have many species, marine species, that are not utilized. We've concentrated on, again, the three iconic species to the detriment of the Nassau grouper and the count. One of the points made in the IDB report, Mr. Speaker, is that we have an opportunity to explode the blue economy. The Ministry with responsibility for marine resources, working with the Ministry with responsibility for the environment, working closely with the Ministry of Transport, working closely with the Ministry of Tourism. Mr. Speaker, there are many opportunities in the sector in order for us to generate revenue for future generations. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we have incorrectly been valuing the assets in our country. It is believed, as a result of studies conducted, that our marine resources, if we were to do a proper valuation of what is in our waters, easily, Mr. Speaker, exceeds $6 billion US. So, Mr. Speaker, our marine protected areas, just to be very specific, the marine protected areas, right now we are at about 10% of our marine environment that is protected. It is our goal, and preferably by the end of the first quarter, to have 20% of our marine resources protected. Minister Ferreira and myself are working very closely with fishers, with local communities, with environmental groups. And Mr. Speaker, within those areas, we have assets that exceed $6 billion US. So even when international agencies are rating us, are evaluating our worth, our value, we are missing an opportunity to give them a proper assessment of what's available. So this sector, Mr. Speaker, is extremely important. And we are going to make sure that it is protected from illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, to make sure it's protected from oil spilling on these assets and damaging these assets, to make sure it is protected from poachers from the south or sports fishermen from the north, to make sure it's protected from persons even within our midst who might share GPS coordinates to friends and families and others on where the best spots are to harvest in the Bahamian environment. And so, Mr. Speaker, we believe that we have a marvelous opportunity through the development of the blue economy to explode the economy of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Let's look at a few figures. Military habitats to support lobster fisheries, 23.5 million in export value annually minimum, 6 million pounds catch annually. Vibrant tourism, more than 68 million in expenditure annually, more than 384 visitors in terms of days annually. So, Mr. Speaker, we have a marvelous opportunity to take advantage of this marine environment. This bill contemplates the Bahamas being one of those pivotal locations where we can have carbon storage for climate mitigation, Mr. Speaker. And so 5 billion is avoided in carbon emissions as a result of just the Bahamian waters. That is worth something in the international community. And that is precisely why we must be committed as a country to ocean health. And this is why this bill is extremely important. 400 million tons of CO2 sequestered in mangroves and seagrass annually, right here in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. So Mr. Speaker, we make a pivotal contribution to the global health as a result of our protection of our marine environment, this bill seeks, through its management practices, through its governance, through its climate change and ocean health, to do just that. In addition, Mr. Speaker, this bill, as I've mentioned before, this bill, Mr. Speaker, also assists us in the diversification into the blue economy, as I have said throughout this presentation. And the reason I continue to mention it, Mr. Speaker, is because unfortunately, we have become so addicted to dollars and cents that we sometimes miss the point that doing the right thing, going green, as the Prime Minister had forecast when he was then the leader of the opposition, that there is an economic bonanza in doing the right thing, the green thing, and in this case, the blue thing. And so Mr. Speaker, the diversification of this economy is doable. This bill paves the way for the diversification of the Bahamian economy. Mr. Speaker, the other thing this bill does is it promotes the use of technology in us gathering the relevant data in order to make evidence-based decisions. This is why we're asking fishers to register. This is why we want vessels to register. This is why we want to put devices on vessels to monitor their movement, where they are located in Bahamian water. Again, so that we can make evidence-based decisions, not conjecture-based decisions, not social media-based decisions, not some folks who wish to clout chase by raising issues that we are already on top of. And so Mr. Speaker, it is important in passing this bill that we recognize we need from the subsistence, we need from the commercial, we need from the sports fishermen, we need that data, because we need to know what impact our fishing practices are having on each marine species so that we can manage it properly and we can govern our resources. Mr. Speaker, in true Baptist Pentecostal tradition, let me say as I close.
Go ahead, Rev.
There are multiple closing in that close, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the legal continuance of the Department of Marine Resources and for the appointment of the director, deputy director, and assistant director, Mr. Speaker, that's why this bill is absolutely important, because again, we want to give them, we want to make sure that they are encoded in statute law. Mr. Speaker, we also want in this bill to define and differentiate the powers between the minister and those of the directors. Many times ministers are engaged in minutia, a lot of things that the technical staff has the capacity to do that ministers should not be involved in, and they can focus on policy, focus on finding the required resources, focus on making sure the persons who work in the ministry can finally get their promotion and be treated fairly and to eliminate anomalies. Those are the things we should be focused on. But the director has the capacity to do many other things. And so we want to make sure that we have a more nimble and vibrant public service, and this bill seeks to do that. We also want to establish an advisory council, Mr. Speaker, and a national fisheries stakeholder forum. We need all of those persons who impact our marine environment to meet regularly, Mr. Speaker. And so this bill clearly outlines the formula for doing that. And of course, they would select two persons who would then serve on the council, which advises the minister. This then ensures we're putting in law, in much the same way we did in the fiscal responsibility bill, Mr. Speaker, we are ensuring structurally that there is consultation throughout the country. Politicians often are elected and suddenly become the brain behind every single new invention in a country. So, Mr. Speaker, we want to make sure that that affliction does not plague us. And so in this bill, we're seeking to make sure that the sector informs the decisions the director makes and ultimately the decisions that the minister and the administration makes as it relates to their own things, their marine resources. And so this bill lays out carefully the establishment and functioning of a fisheries council and the National Fisheries Stakeholder Forum. Mr. Speaker, there is a requirement that every marine resources is carefully managed. In the same way we have done with the lobster, we have the Marine Stewardship Council designation, an international designation that allows us to have lobster sold in jurisdictions around the world, in stores around the world, because they are convinced through that designation that we are sustainably managing that resource. Well, similarly, we need that applied to other species. And so this bill clearly outlines how we get there in developing a plan for every marine resource that we have. All of our natural resources that intersect with this particular sector. And so, Mr. Speaker, you'll see a recurring theme in what we're doing in this bill that also appeared in other pieces of legislation laid earlier by this administration. And that is putting the onus on us to be accountable to the country by putting in law the requirement that we consult, that we come and report, that we have a plan that the public could question. Are you following the plan that you've laid out? So in much the same way we did it in the compendium of financial services legislation, we're doing it also in the fisheries legislation. Mr. Speaker, I've already mentioned we have the requirement of the licensing of commercial and foreign sports fishing vessels and sports fishers. And Mr. Speaker, again, that is about data collection. There'll be no additional cost put on your head of any significance. This is about data collection. We want to know who's out there, what they are fishing, how much they are capturing, how does that affect the stock, Mr. Speaker. That is the purpose of that. In addition, Mr. Speaker, there is the prohibition to foreign involvement in the commercial fishing sector. Mr. Speaker, let me say very quickly. I came in the chair in 2018, immediately met with a number of stakeholders, inclusive of a small group of commercial operators who, again, during that period, we signed off on a number of dive permits or compressor permits for their foreign workers to participate in this sector, or spouses of Bahamians to participate in the sector. But we made it absolutely clear that both administrations, the Progressive Liberal Party, the Free National Movement, for years, every administration has clearly indicated they had no intention on this being continued. We welcome others into the country. We would love for them to become citizens to fully enjoy all aspects of Bahamian life and all of the benefits that go with it. But we did not contemplate a continuation of non-Bahamians participating in the fishing sector, working on Bahamian vessels. Processing, yes. So this is one of the very few areas carved out for Bahamians, Mr. Speaker. And while I am sympathetic, I am deeply concerned about any business who feels that they would be adversely affected. My primary responsibility is to protect the limited Bahamian resources for Bahamians who right now are trying to eke out an existence, a livelihood in this country, Mr. Speaker. And we've consulted, we've met with them. I have on more than one occasion have clearly indicated what the intention was. And 1 year later, as predicted, we did not sign off on compressor permits. This year, we have followed the same practice. And just to give you a sense of how many Bahamians are using, or how many persons are using compressors in the Bahamas, we give out, I was saying to colleagues, 600 to 800 compressors annually versus 40 to 60 in the best year to non-Bahamians. And the technical team amended that recently. They said, Mr. Actually, it's more like 1,000 compressors are given out to permits are given out to Bahamians. And again, last year, I think the applicants may have been in the vicinity of 40. So, Mr. Speaker, we believe that there are persons out there who are available to work. We have an obligation to go and find them, to train them. In fact, we're working with the Defense Force and the National Training Agency. We have established a national dive program, which conveniently was not mentioned in an interview I saw last night. And so, Mr. Speaker, we have a national dive program which is being expanded this year, so that we could create a cadre of divers that can work on these vessels. We have, through this budget that is in place, courtesy of the Ministry of Finance, have made available more funding than any other time in this country's history for small business development. funding, grants as well as credit, or they can take an equity position in businesses. So, Mr. Speaker, for those persons who feel that they would be adversely affected because their business model is based on foreign labor, I want them to know we are prepared to work with them, to assist them in succeeding. When you succeed, this country succeeds. But in good conscience, Mr. Speaker, I could not make the case that one of the few areas carved out for Bahamians that I ought to lead the charge in terms of facilitating others who, through the simple act of becoming citizens, can take advantage of that. And so, Mr. Speaker, as I've said, even as we collect poachers in Bahamian waters, I am sympathetic to young men from other countries who are interdicted, but we have an obligation to protect Bahamian patrimony for Bahamians. And so, Mr. Speaker, I believe, and this is just an aside, Mr. Speaker, and some may wish I don't even mention it, but Mr. Speaker, I believe the country missed an opportunity in 2 referendums on the issue of making sure there's parity between Bahamian men and women. We missed an opportunity. The discussion of the fisheries bill is not the next opportunity to relitigate that particular issue. That's not what this bill is about. And so I stand in solidarity with Bahamian men and women who deserve to have equal treatment under the law. This issue is about livelihood for Bahamians, empowerment for Bahamians, the use of natural resources of the Bahamas by Bahamians and for Bahamians. And so, Mr. Speaker, on this issue, we are making it clear that we are not issuing divers or compressor permit for non-Bahamians, and we are standing ready to assist the handful of commercial operators who may experience some challenges in their business. We do it in other areas. If you lose some revenue because of the conservation recommendations, there are alternative livelihoods that we can work with you on. And we're saying, listen, there are many Bahamians out there, let's cultivate them. Mr. Speaker, the requirement for the use of vessel monitoring system on board commercial fishing vessels, Mr. Speaker, is well underway. In fact, a pilot project is being launched with a number of fishers, and that, Mr. Speaker, has in fact been funded. We're excited by that project. We want to let fishers know, we know you like to guide your special spot. This information is not to be shared. We're not sharing this with anybody else so they can find your special rock that have your tails every time the season, the lobster tails when the season opens. This is about just making sure we know where everybody is who are in Bahamian waters. And so somebody park in the Exuma Sea Park, we want to understand why you're there, because we know that through the metrics that we use, we are able to evaluate, did you truly have a breakdown? Did you pause long enough to do some fishing, or were you just taking in the sights? So the vessel monitoring system is really to assist us. It is also to help you, that if you get lost, again, it keeps you safe as well. And so we're encouraging everyone to do so. We've had a relationship with neighboring countries that committed to making sure that this was on their citizens' vessels, like the Dominican Republic, and the minister is still working towards this end. We have not interdicted one Dominican fishing vessel that had a vessel monitoring system on it. But we believe that this would make a difference in the policing of them in their country as well as in our country. Mr. Speaker, this bill also makes provision for the proper management and development of the aquaculture sector using best practices, which I elaborated on. And in closing, Mr. Speaker, in the wrap-up, I'll elaborate more on this particular subject. And so, Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I want to say once again a special thank you to the fishers who have labored long and hard in this country, who've waited for this day, for this bill to be enacted, who have spent a lot of time providing advice, assisting with the drafting. I also want to say to all of the non-governmental organizations that have played a role in the drafting and the editing and participating in the workshops, that we are appreciative of you. I also want to say to the Department of Marine Resources, the entire team, especially Mr. Gregory Bethel and Dr. Lester Gittins and Edison Delaveau, the entire team for playing such a pivotal role in making this happen, and to the Royal Bahamas Police and Defense Force who were part of those discussions, the Attorney General Office. I want to really go back and talk about the Defense Force. We have had, over the last 2 years, the largest number of interdictions of poachers in Bahamian waters, I believe, in the history of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. And to say to members of the judiciary, we are so appreciative of you sending the right message to the public, locally and internationally, by the huge fines you've levied, that you see our marine resources as such an important asset to our future development, that you wanted to send a clear message to those violators. Also want to say a special thank you to the Ministry of Transport, which is an important partner for us in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. To all of the agencies, the media that continues to make known to the public the various initiatives that we have launched in order to protect our marine environment. And so, Mr. Speaker, I say to the fishers throughout the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, and if you would permit me to go home for a moment into East Grand Bahama, we want to say to you that we have heard your cries. And to the fishers in West Grand Bahama and in Freeport in general, Fritz Thompson, we want to say to you that we've heard your cry. And to those in Long Island and in Andros, Brother Boleg is here. Brother Boleg, Ricky Maki, Hank Johnson, Adrian Gibson. Listen, they have, on behalf of their constituents, the Honorable Peter Turnquest, they are so, Michael, they have harassed their colleagues. They say, listen, if you could bring a suite of financial services legislation, you must be able to find the time to make sure that the fisheries bill comes into force. All of the Family Island members of Parliament, we hear from them. We hear from Picewell and Chester Cooper on a regular basis. They are concerned about the protection, and of course James Albury. And we know, again, the leader of opposition is leading the charge. Is leading the charge in terms of making sure the opposition fully supports this bill, because he knows Cat Island gets some good fishing waters. And of course, we have worked hand in hand with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who has been working tirelessly on the international arena, sensitizing our neighbors. In fact, it was because of the intervention of persons like Darren Henfey, who made sure that each meeting he's at, he is pulling his counterpart aside and saying, listen, we need your help on protecting Bahamian waters. And so the message has gone out. Some of the interdictions we've had is because other governments who previously were not cooperating with us in these interdictions have in fact cooperated with us. And so I want to say to all the Family Island members of Parliament, if I missed any of you, I just want to say I'm grateful for what you have done, for you raising this issue with us. West End and Bimini constantly, again, raises the concern of those constituents and want to make sure she's looking forward to this vaccine working so that those sports fishing tournaments can get back in Bimini, get back in Abaco. So I'm grateful to all of you for your intervention. And of course, Clay Sweeting in the Senate has been a constant in terms of raising the issues with us, and we are grateful for the input that he has given. Mr. Speaker, I end where I began. Governance is a relay. And what we are doing now, as I stand here, I stand on the shoulders of all of the ministers of agriculture and marine resources who have gone before me. One of the reasons we thought it was important to consult with the opposition is in every initiative we did in the ministry is to get their buy-in or advice so that we don't miss anything. So that in the unlikely event of them becoming the government in another year and a half, that we have continuity. It is important that we ensure that there's continuity in good governance. And we believe that while this bill does not capture all of the matters, in fact, colleagues, I'm of the view That's so important is the marine environment that we should enshrine in the Constitution that the resources are reserved for Bahamian use. It is my hope that we will come back to this place and put in the Constitution that fishing in the Bahamas is reserved for Bahamian, that we put it at that level, because again, 5% of our 200, if depending on who you listen to, 100,000 or 260,000 square miles, 5% of it is land. 5%. 95% of it is water. So we have an opportunity, by the way, member for Kalani, given the size, the 95%, we think we should have an exponential increase in the budget for us now. 95% of the country is water. Rich ecosystem with biodiversity that not only serves us, but also serves the international community. And so with those few words, Marco City is honored to move this amendment to this bill, and we are looking forward at the end of this day to bringing this into force. Marco City, love you. God bless you.
Chair recognizes honorable member for East Grand Bahama.
Mr. Speaker, let me just say from the outset that I support the bill. I do have a challenge, though, and I just wonder whether the minister can address it, because he kind of went over it. And that is in respect to this clause 32 that speaks about who can fish on a vessel. It clearly says in the act that it must be a citizen. Does that mean that spousal permit holders and permanent residents are likewise excluded from being able to fish? And if that is in fact the case, how do we square that with the Constitution and with general human rights? Because I would think that any spouse of a Bahamian should have a right to help support their family in whatever their skill is. I think it's a slippery slope, Mr. Speaker, because if you start with fishing, then is the hotel industry next? I just wonder how we square that, and whether we've consulted with all of the human rights organizations and representatives here to ensure that we do not continue to perpetuate a discriminatory policy against Bahamian women in particular, because let's face it, that's what we're talking about. The Constitution already has some built-in discriminatory clauses. This seems to be further entrenching that discriminatory clause, where we, and I'm going to use we males, are saying to these females that we don't trust you to make a decision about your spouse and whether they're marrying you for love or for something else. And it also seems to me maybe admitting that and the Minister for Immigration, I'm sure, will address it, maybe admitting that the Immigration Department is not able to police these quote-unquote marriages of convenience, and thus we are punishing people who are who actually have a sustainable marriage. I was wondering about that, and maybe the minister will address it.
Thank you very much, member for East Grand Bahama, my neighbor to Marco City, and my member of parliament. Yes, Mr. Member for East Grand Bahama, I think you may have missed the first part of the presentation where I made the point that I think both administrations missed a marvelous opportunity to create parity in the Constitution by supporting Bahamian men and women. It seemed as if politics dominated those considerations, but that this bill is not the flashpoint to relitigate those issues which we should address. And so I don't seek to have the important, wide-ranging provisions in this bill to be subsumed in the discussion on this one aspect. But to answer the question pointedly, We sit in this house. It is a privilege on many levels. One of those privileges seem to be that there are a number of spouses of Bahamians who are equally, and in some cases more talented than persons in this room, but who, by virtue of a carve-out in our system, cannot offer for the House of Assembly. And I've not heard a petition by any member in this place or the other place petitioning for their participation and highlighting what they term to be discrimination. I've had cause to live in communities which I'm very proud of from where I came and that I'm still loyal to, where gunshot lullabies put us to sleep at nights from time to time, and I've had to call police. At no point did any of the police who show up, as is other law enforcement agencies, send a spouse of any Bahamian citizen, because again, that is another area of carve-out, who's not a citizen of the Bahamas. So there are some carve-outs. And again, the Minister with responsibility for immigration will elaborate on that and talk about the Bahamian bar. So I'm just making the point that there are some carve-outs that we are entitled to, that we're entitled to as Bahamians, and this is one of them. So again, we encourage persons to apply for citizenship, one, and we also say to ourselves, let's move faster in adjudicating these applications for citizenship. And so, sorry, I just want to, if you give me just one moment, I just want to complete the answer.
Honorable members, honorable members, honorable member for Kell Island, I just want to make an intervention because we are not at the stage yet for the debate. The motion on the floor has not yet been seconded. I permitted an intervention by East Grand Bahama, which apparently is provoking a premature debate. I want to put an end to that so that we can have it seconded, and then during the presentations, you can bring your point. Honorable member, I don't want to go any further until the matter is seconded. Is there a seconder? Honorable member, you had concluded. I would like the seconder. Yes. Let the matter be. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamakro. Honorable member, resume your seat. The chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamakro. There's a motion on the floor. It has to be seconded, and then the debate begins.
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I rise to second the debate on a bill for an act to provide for the regulation of the fisheries resources of the Bahamas, to provide for the long-term conservation, management, and sustainable development of fisheries resource by the application of the precautionary and ecosystem approaches to enhance the livelihood of communities dependent on fishing and to meet the need of future generations. Mr. Speaker, can you protect me, please? Kell Island really...
Honorable members, the member for Yamakro has the floor. Carry on, honorable member.
Thank you very much. North Africa isn't doing anything to provide for licensing of commercial fishers and fishing vessels, to deter, prevent, and eliminate illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing in the Bahamas fisheries waters, to repeal the Fisheries Resources Jurisdiction and Conservation Act 1977, and for connected purposes. Mr. Speaker, with your leave, I'd like to congratulate the member for Marco City for such a riveting, comprehensive, and holistic presentation this morning. It was anthropological, if that's the right word. It was historical. And Google that one. It was relevant. It represents a comparative analysis, both locally and internationally. And I see everybody pick up their phones and start Googling. Yes. And it was relevant. And as Marco City indicated in terms of likening it to a race, he brought the baton, or this, these deliberations here today has brought the baton thus far under a minister-led administration. So I want to express profound gratitude to Marco City, and by extension, all the persons who participated in these deliberations, the deliberations that brought us here today. The Defense Force, the Police Force, Long Island, Cat Island, Exuma, Spanish Wells, North and South Eleuthera, Exuma, all of the islands, Meguana, that brought us here today. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to start my presentation to these deliberations, just to contextualize it, Mr. Speaker. I will give a brief, short, historical overview, bring it down to, highlighting some of the human experiences, the lamentations over the years that we've experienced, that we've heard from Bahamians, and then we'll take you through, as best I can, through the legislation that we intend to amend here today. Mr. Speaker, and I quote from an article from the Tribune, "Tough call. The scale of illegal fishing, the scale of the illegal fishing problem." Mr. Speaker, I want to date this document. This was in January 9th, 2013. And you will see as I go through this document, Mr. Speaker, and two other research documents that I brought you today, how relevant the issue of our third pillar of our economy is to these deliberations today and the survival of the Bahamian economy. Environmentalists view the rape and pillage of the Bahamian... Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Good. Point taken. Environmentalists view the rape and pillage of the Bahamian fish stock as perhaps our greatest national threat. Bahamas National Trust Chief Eric Carey argues that in addition to the huge physical toll on marine resources, there is a psychological price to be paid by Bahamian fishermen who feel defeated and defenseless against an unchecked foreign onslaught. They are telling us it is unfair and illogical for them to be policed and have fishing bans during closed season when others are allowed or permitted to fish unchecked. This must stop, he says. Bahamians are born of and dependent upon the sea and its resources. The poaching threatens the very core of our people's existence. And Mr. Speaker, I hear Cat Island speaking, but there are some other deliberations we shall have on some other matters. Mr. Speaker, you hear Mr. Eric Carey speaking, and he was speaking to the unchecked and unregulated and unlawful disparagement of our fishing resources. And this article goes on, Mr. Speaker, because it highlights persons from the different communities and what their views are in terms of what was happening in the Bahamas some 8 years ago. And you will see some significant players. And why I commended my colleague who preceded me is because you would see different ministers from different administrations committing to the very same act that we're here discussing today. As a matter of fact, a gentleman that the former Minister for Immigration lamented that there was an intention to stop all work permits for persons who are not Bahamians working in a professional capacity for commercial fishing. Because with all due respect, there is nothing political about protecting the lives of Bahamians. And you could change it, you say the livelihood of Bahamians. And we've seen that. I heard my good colleague made mention of whether or not we were being discriminatory. But I think that the laws of the Bahamas and the Constitution of the Bahamas recognize that in certain respects, there are certain things that should be preserved for Bahamians. When I sit to swear persons in, I congratulate them on this wonderful experience of becoming a Bahamian. And I often told them that it comes with responsibilities, and we don't mind taking our things back. And I told them when you're not a Bahamian, there's a certain socio-political environment that you should not involve yourself in. So don't vote. I don't want you to be disparaging, discourteous, and all those different things in our political affairs. That's none of your business. Some people, I don't want them telling me about Sir Lyndon. Cut it. That's for me and somebody else to talk about.
That's for me, like he used to say.
Some people, I don't want them to tell me about my prime minister. That ain't your business. Don't put on the red, don't put on the gold.
That's for me.
The Constitution recognizes that. And so when we come here, only Bahamians can apply to run. We debated a piece of legislation on the amendment of laid by the Minister for National Security on the voters registry, which identified our right to vote, our right to change the Constitution, and our right to participate in local government. And that is preserved only for Bahamians. So this is not of recent vintage. This is something that we believe in, I think is at the core of our existence or what we believe. And so I tell those young persons as I congratulate them, I say, now don't let nobody discourage you from participating. Go out and celebrate it. If you want to vote, you go and vote. If you want to post, you think you post it. That's your business. But I tell them if a Bahamian commits treason, there's a result for that. And if we find that you've done something that would cause you not to be entitled to our things, we can take it back. And this is our thing. Fisheries is our thing. I heard someone made a disparaging mark about Kalani and Cat Island Rumkins and Salvador jumped his feet and said, I see you looking up. You like when I call your name? He jumped up and he said, I could do that, but you don't do that. Yes, and so he was right.
And you fix that?
He said I could do that.
And you fix it? You jump on him.
But sometimes when sometimes, Mr. Speaker, and he's agreeing now that he's right. They let him talk bad, but sometimes when he talks bad, it's really not fair. It's not right. I've seen him go on a show the other night and says that the good member for Kalani doesn't take him serious. When I saw Kalani stood in this house and invite him to all the meetings, and then and Kalani said then, if I have done anything wrong to you, I apologize. Come. This is in July. Come to the meeting and let's have a discussion.
He didn't come.
And on coming to that meeting, Exuma can confirm that they were introduced to the strategic leaders in this COVID-19 experience. And Exuma asked a few questions. His colleague asked a few questions. They said, that's all you want to know? No suggestions, and they left. So not all times when he talks bad about Kalani, he's right. And then he stood up last week or some week before last and said he wants to meet. But Mr. Speaker, this is our thing. And after I like the way that Marcos City puts it. It represents the collaboration, the consultation, resulted in us bringing this legislation here where the majority of the Bahamians, the majority of persons who are watching from home today agree that this is the disposition that we should take in terms of our fishing resources, and that is to protect it. And this article goes on to say how many millions of pounds of lobster, grouper, or whatever have you, is taken from our waters on a yearly basis, taken down south. A part of his article identifies the fact that persons from government has traveled to countries to have discussions on the illegal incursion or trespass of persons into Bahamian waters to take our fisheries resources. We've heard stories of persons who said people use weapons on them. This act addresses all of that, and I'm going to get to the act before my time runs out. Persons who go and take their traps. Yes. Persons go and take their traps.
Don't mind if you're being mysterious. Don't mind.
Some things he should talk about, he can't talk about, or he wouldn't want to talk about. We got all this oil drilling going on now. All right? And the Prime Minister, I can tell you the Prime Minister says he doesn't support it. I was at the AG's office, and I did every contortion that I possibly could legally without being illegal. But somebody dropped that type. And after we did all of the legal contortions to stay within the bounds of the law, we say, let's get some other QCs, no pun intended, to look at this agreement. It was draft tight. But he wouldn't talk about those things. Siemens not. The implications in terms of job loss, loss of revenue to government, and lost fisheries resources is in the tens of millions of dollars. And Mr. Speaker, there's a reason why I'm speaking this way, is because I'm speaking to the audience, those who, in Abaco, Andros, Eleuthera, and a lot of them who sitting in this house. Because the member for Marco City included almost everybody in the discussion. A couple of nights ago, after we had a parliamentary meeting, caucus meeting, we had to go and meet with the opposition. I noticed somebody was absent, or it was just very silent. And the opportunity was given to ask almost any question on this bill. To improve, same. Mr. Speaker, in my research, I saw that there were very good reports done. The EU has given money to study the fishing resources in the Bahamas. There was a report on illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, which was produced by the Bahamas Lobster Fisheries Improvement Act. The initiative was sponsored by local seafood food processors in a bid to win endorsement for crayfish export under the European Union's new catch fish certification program. One of my good friends when I was a boy, and I was in church choir at St. James, Adrian LaRoda. I want to congratulate Mr. LaRoda for his efforts to protect the fisheries resources. And one day we should honor persons like Mr. LaRoda, who spoke loudly and in a proud way to defend the heritage and the economic viability of this country. He said they shouldn't even be on boats. He spoke about the use of different apparatus. But, okay. Okay. He spoke about the use of different apparatus. And I said, and this happened just after the election. And so this article was saying that the preservation of our fisheries resources is not a political tool. And written in 2013, it says, last summer, Immigration Minister Mr. Fred Mitchell announced a ban on all work permits. And then Adrian LaRoda goes on to make certain statements. Early last year, it says, the previous administration launched a diplomatic initiative with intergovernmental talks set to begin just after the election. And Trade Minister Mr. Ryan Pinder, Foreign Minister Mr. Fred Mitchell, and National Security Minister, the late Mr. Bernard Nottage, and Fisheries Minister Mr. Alfred Gray, held 4 days of meeting in a certain country to discuss the fisheries resources. You know why that was so urgent to have that type of discussion? And different administrations have had that different type of discussion because they know the entire country was concerned about the protection of our fisheries resources. So that's why they went. And they were having those discussions here. That's right. And that's why they went.
Chair recognizes the honorable member for Bamboo Town.
Mr. Speaker, what a powerful place and position for us to break for the luncheon break. You know, Yamakra is reared up and ready to go and obviously did his work. And so, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to move that the business of this House do suspend until 3 p.m. today when we will return. We're breaking, Mr. Speaker, now at 12:30 because the Senate is scheduled to meet. And as all of us in here know, the Senate staff is the same House of Assembly staff that we use. And when the Senate convenes in about 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 minutes, the Minister of State for Finance will do the deep dive on the fiscal strategy report that the Prime Minister would have signaled in his minister's communique earlier. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I do so move that the business of this House suspends until 3 p.m. today.
Honorable members, it has been moved and seconded that the business of this House to suspend until 3 p.m. this afternoon. As many members are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will stand. The business of this House stands suspended until 3 p.m. this afternoon.